Hey everyone, thank you for joining in and I hope you're having a great day. This is your host Absar Ahmed and we've got a wonderful workshop planned for you today. We'll wait a couple of minutes so anyone who's running late can join us as well. So stay tuned and I'll be back with you shortly. All right, so we have a good amount of attendees now, so let's start the workshop. For those who just joined us now, welcome and thank you for joining in. The ongoing state of the economy isn't too great, so we wanted to explore how you could use APIs to manage your finances better. And we found a really interesting use case. Now, when you're working with financial data, you're bound to run into some predefined issues. So let's discuss those first. For instance, let me ask you this. How many bank accounts do you have? Quite a few, I bet. And some of you might even have accounts in multiple states and countries. So your financial data is distributed between different banks that we first need to consolidate. For this particular reason, we have data aggregation companies that combine our financial data from multiple streams into a single platform. So now that we have all of our data in a single place, that's great. But there is one more problem here. As you can see on my screen, financial data itself is extremely boring and confusing. If I showed you my financial data right now, it would probably take you a while to make any sense out of it. So what if we could convert this data into a more meaningful form? So let's say something like a graph that you can see on my screen to make it visually interesting. Now, this is something that you can work with. It's intuitive, easy to understand, and pretty fun as well. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this workshop. By the end of this session, you will be able to use APIs to pull your financial data and convert it into visually appealing graphs. So you can do your budgeting without getting bored to tears. This is Absar Ahmed from APIMatic's DevRel team, and with me, I have my colleague, Wajahat Iqbal, who is an SDK expert here at APIMatic. Hey, Wajahat, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Hey, Absar, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here. Welcome everyone to the workshop. I'm Wajahat and I'm a tech lead here in APIMatic. I am a big advocate of enhancing developer experience for APIs using well-designed SDKs. I had a lot of fun working on this project for the workshop, and I'm really excited to show it to everyone here as well.
So Wajahat, I'm pretty sure everyone has the same question as I do, and that is, how does your application actually work? Behind the scenes, how are we converting all this raw financial data into graphs?
Okay, so our application is going to use a couple of APIs to get this done. First is Finicities, and the second one is ThoughtSpots. Finicity simplifies financial and banking management by providing financial data aggregation. ThoughtSpot, on the other hand, is a business intelligence and big data analytics platform that helps in real-time business analytics. We'll use Finicity's API to pull our financial data and then use ThoughtSpot's API to present that data into a graphical form. I'm going to create the application in TypeScript, and for easier integration, I'm going to use SDKs to call the Finicity and ThoughtSpot's API. We have apps for client and server side. Client app is a React app, and we'll be visualizing our data using this application for and for the back end of the things, we have a server application. This is the application we'll actually be working on and incorporating these SDKs in.
All right, so that sounds really interesting. So I have a question. For users who want to code alongside the workshop, is there any skeleton app that users can use, or are we creating the project from scratch?
Okay, so we do have a skeleton project that can be cloned from GitHub. We'll only be inserting in the parts where we'll be consuming these APIs through the SDKs, because we want to see how can we leverage SDKs for better consumption of APIs. So that is the only part we are going to incorporate as far as the coding is concerned. The rest of the skeleton is there on the GitHub, and you can simply go and clone that. And I think this is a good time to go over a quick recap of the prerequisites. These prerequisites were part of the invitation email. So the first one is to clone the skeleton project that I think everyone has already done that. There, you need to create accounts at Finicity, ThoughtSpot, and Snowflake. The Snowflake is the cloud database that we are going to populate our Finicity financial data in. And then we need to create a database with a table in the Snowflake workspace, and finally integration of Snowflake connection with the ThoughtSpot. So these were all prerequisites, and I'm hoping these are all covered.
All right, so that sounds wonderful. By the way, guys, if you have any questions during the workshop, feel free to share them in the chat, or you can also put them in the Q&A section and we'll make sure to address those at the end. And also, if by any chance you miss a few steps and lag behind in the coding, don't worry, we will upload a copy of this session. This session will be recorded and you can watch it again on the website as well. So Wajahat, I think let's jump right into it. The floor is all yours. Let's start the workshop.
Perfect. So let me open up my Visual Studio Code. So this is the project that you have cloned. You can see there are a couple of applications here. I'll go over what each of these projects do, but first let's navigate to Finicity API project and download and install all the dependencies to save us some time. So I've opened up my terminal and I'll navigate to Finicity API directory. Okay, so now that we are here, I'm simply going to install all the dependencies, and this is going to get us our dependencies installed. So meanwhile this gets installed, I'm going to open up another terminal and I'm going to head to server, and I'm going to install dependencies here as well. And let me open up another terminal for the server application as well. Okay, so I went to the server application. I was supposed to go to the client application first. Let me go there and install all the dependencies. We'll visit the server later. So with everything on installation now, let's explore what these projects do. We already discussed about the client application, the server application. There's this third project that is Finicity API. This is the SDK that we are integrating in this application, and we are going to use this SDK to consume the Finicity API, and this will be incorporated in this server SDK along with the ThoughtSpots. So while this build, I think we can head over to the package.json of server application. So we have a couple of dependencies here. We are using the ThoughtSpots SDK and the Finicity's SDK, and we'll be getting our documentation from their portals. So let me open those. They're opened here in my browser. We'll share the links for both of these portals in the chat so that you can have those opened in your browser as well. So now I think we can start with some discussion over these dependencies. So the first one is ThoughtSpots and the second one is Finicities. This is the one we have just built. It is still building. So the second one is ThoughtSpots. One difference that you might notice is that we are referencing this Finicity's API library by path, and we have added it manually in our project. On the other hand, if we look at the ThoughtSpots dependency, we just gave in a version number, we gave in its name, and this is about it. This is because this is published on NPM. So this is one difference here in using both the SDKs. Let's look at our SDK that is being built.
Okay, so while the SDKs get built, I have a question here. So I see that ThoughtSpot's API and Finicity's API, the SDKs are being deployed differently. For example, the Finicity's SDK, we've just incorporated within the application. By the way, all of this is already present in the skeleton app. So you, whoever's following us, you don't need to make any changes. So Finicity's SDK is directly included in our project, whereas ThoughtSpot's SDK is being referenced from NPM. So first of all, where are we getting this Finicity SDK from? And what's the better way to publish your SDKs, either on your website by the get download or get SDK button, or should they be on the package managers?
Okay, so that is a very good question. A published package is the preferred way. It saves you step to get your library to the users, and this is how the whole community uses these packages. And plus, it's easier to document for your users to use the library. So I can demonstrate this with the example of ThoughtSpot and Finicity. Uh, let's first go to the Finicity's portal. On the right side, you can see there's this HTTP set by default and a bunch of other languages. We'll explore this later. I'll head over to TypeScript, and we can see there is a step-by-step guide to use your TypeScript Finicity's TypeScript SDK in your application. So as we can see, if we scroll down, we can see there's a whole bunch of steps to get this integrated in your application. So you have to first download this from here. There's this get SDK button. You have to download this, and this will download the Finicity's SDK. This is a zip. You'll uh, unzip it and insert it in your project. So that is the first step. Then you have to build it like we did. We first installed the dependencies, then it started building. And once it's built, you have to manually link that in your repository. So this, as you can see, adds a lot of steps, and this is hard to document, and this is also hard to use. On the other hand, if we go to ThoughtSpot and we similarly select TypeScript and go to setup and usage, uh, as we can see, there's this one command, and that is about it. This is all you need to install the package in your project. You give an npm install name of the package. If there is a version you want to specify, you can specify it here. If you don't, it is going to download the latest, install the latest package. And this is about it, just one step guide to install the package. So you have saved a lot of steps for users. It is easier to document, and this is how the community uses it.
All right, so if if any of our viewers have SDKs that they want to make available for the public, make sure they're deployed on their respective package managers. It reduces a lot of friction in consuming those SDKs and integrating your APIs.
Yes, exactly. So now that we have touched portals, so let's explore these portals more. So we started with HTTP. There are a bunch of other languages. As we have seen, we selected TypeScript. So with HTTP, you can see there is this step-by-step guide, basic uh, information regarding servers, if there's any authorization required, any additional headers and stuff like that, any API errors, and we have few curl commands as well. So this, if you select HTTP in your portal, you'll get a number of curl curl code samples. You can copy those, paste those in your terminal, and you can call any endpoint through that. So let me select this first endpoint that I find here, and it's get account owner. On the right side, you can see there is this curl sample. This is for the raw consumption of API. If you're not using any language, just copy this curl command and call any endpoint through your terminal. So this is for the HTTP. We selected TypeScript already. We can select any other languages. So let's select .NET. We have this on the right side. We can see there is this .NET specific code sample. So if you want to call your API using .NET SDK, this is the way to go about it. You can call this, you can copy this code and paste it, and you'll be calling your first endpoint. So if we go to configure, and there is this option show complete file, if we disable this, we are getting the minimum code to call an endpoint, but I'll keep this to show the complete file. And by the way, the default behavior there is to not show the complete file and just get the minimum code here, but that can be configured. And now we have everything else as well, additional code like the imports required, client initialization, that is the Finicity's SDK client, and any controller or endpoint group that contains the endpoint method that we want to call, any parameters that we want to uh, pass in it, and the actual uh, method that calls the API. So uh, we can select any language, and this is the specific code to call this endpoint in that particular language. And we can go to TypeScript, and for this application, since our application is in TypeScript, so we'll be using the code samples from here.
But if you guys want to run these endpoints that we use here in your own applications that are in some other language, for example, if you're working with Python, you can actually copy code samples for different languages and use them in your application. So you can definitely do that as a side project too.
Yes, thank you, Absar. So we have now everything built up. So I'm just going to install the dependencies in our server application. By the way, on the right side, on the left side, you can see there is .environment file. This is not part of the skeleton that is present on the GitHub. You can just add this in here, and you can put in a bunch of environment variables. We'll be using those later in our code.
So while we're talking about environment variables, right, why are we even using them in the first place? We can just directly add the values as well, right?
Yes, so that is another good question. It's a good idea not to add private information like basic authentication details or API key or any sort of access token in your code, because you'll be pushing your code to GitHub, and you don't want that sort of information to be exposed. And so it's a good idea to use environment variables in place of the actual uh, API key or access token. You can use that in application code, configure that in your CI. So yeah, that's the reason we should be using environment variables.
All right, thank you for that. By the way, right now what we've done is we're just installing the dependencies and we're just building our applications, and then we can actually get to the implementation part, which is going to be installing or using Finicity's APIs first and then ThoughtSpot's APIs.
Yes, exactly. So let me go over One more dependency that we have here, that is, so it is here is the Snowflake SDK. We are using another SDK, Snowflake's SDK. This is the cloud database that we are using to store our data from the Finicities API. This is our financial data, and we populate our database with this data, and then this is what we are going to visualize in the end. Okay, so now we have everything installed, so we can get to the fun part, that is coding. Okay, so I'll start with the Finicity file. So we have a bunch of files here. We'll only be working in the finicity.ts and thoughtspot.ts, and we'll be incorporating our SDKs here. Okay, so I have added some comments here. We'll be adding our code below these comments. But I think the first thing first, we need to have an access token to call the API. So let's go to our portal and find the endpoint that is going to get us this access token. So on the left side, you can see there are a bunch of endpoint groups. If you select one, you'll see some endpoints group there. For instance, this account owner, this only has one endpoint. What we are looking for is the authentication endpoint group. It has two endpoints, and we want to call partner authentication. This is going to get us our token. So again, this is configured to show us complete file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that option, show us complete code. Okay, so on the in the middle, you can see there are a bunch of parameters here. There is this content type, this is required, accept is required, and body is required. So these are all the parameters which are required, and there are some values given in there. These are some random values. You can actually change those as well. For instance, if I think my partner ID is something like A123, on the right side, you can see this is reflected in our code sample as well. So this is this part, this is interactive, and you can play with this, and you'll have the changes reflected in your code samples. Okay, so now with all that setup, we need to first initialize our client. I'm going to copy this code, and I'm going to paste it somewhere up here. I think this is a good place to paste this, and now we have our code inserted. I'm going to import the client. Okay, so like I mentioned, we'll be using a bunch of environment variables here, and I have named those already. So let me copy those so that I don't make any typo here. So the first one is Finicity app key. And we now have our app key. The second one is app token. And I'll copy this one as well. Okay, so this is all set up here. Let me increase the timeout. This is 0 by default. And I'll set it to something like 1000. So this is in milliseconds. So our timeout is 1000 milliseconds. Okay, now we want to use this client and call our endpoint. We'll again head to the portal. So this is the code that we want to call. Actually, this complete snippet. And I'll just go ahead and paste it here. I'll indent this, add in the missing imports. And we have everything set up here. I'm going to extract this authentication controller from here to make things neat here so that this method is only returning us the access token and it's easier to understand. I'm going to paste it somewhere here. Okay, so now we have authentication controller here. And so with that controller, the authentication controller, we can call the endpoint that we wanted to call to get our access token. It takes in a bunch of parameters, content type, accept, and body. So some of these parameters are going to be in paths. Some of actually there isn't any path parameter here, but we can pass in a whole bunch of parameters here. Some will go to path parameter, some will go in path, some will be query parameters, and one will go to body as well. So this is all taken care of behind the scenes. We don't have to do anything manual to make sure our parameter is being sent in query or body or path. And uh, we can just simply pass those parameters in the endpoint method, and each and everything is taken care of behind the scenes by the SDK. So this is A123 that we set up in our playground. I'm going to replace this with the environment variables as well.
By the way, the partner ID and partner secret, you can get these by signing up on Finicity's website. So these were already included in the prerequisites, but if you haven't already, go ahead and sign up there and you will get access to your partner ID and secret.
Yes, thank you, Absar. And the second one that I need is partner secret. So I have an environment variable for this as well. And we are getting an error. This is because if you look at partner credentials model, partner ID and partner secret both are required fields. Let me quickly go to the file. And this is the file from the build SDK. So we have two parameters here, both are required. So we need to pass something that is not undefined or can be undefined. So if we take something from environment variables, it can be undefined. So let me first close my node modules, sorry, my dist folder. And since this is required, I'll just pass in a default value, which in our case is an empty string. Okay, so this is all set up now. Here you can see there is this destructured JavaScript object. We have result as well as HTTP response. So we can return complete API response with this endpoint. You'll have status code and any sort of headers and all that information as well. For this particular method, we only want results. So let me remove all that and return the result. And I think we can go one step further and just return the token string. There might be a bunch of other information regarding token as well. We don't need that right now. So as I mentioned, there are some comments here that uh, uh, to explain what I just said, we can use status code headers and any other information, complete raw response. I'm going to delete these comments. And in this is guarded by a try catch. And I'm going to, what can I do with these errors? I think I should simply log those and okay, so I need to console.log and I can return an empty string here. So I think I'll need to return another empty string here so that I can give this method a return type, and it is going to be a promise since this is an async function. And in this promise, we can wrap a string, and that is our access token. So yeah, we have everything set up here. So this is guarded by our try catch. We could have omitted this try catch as well, but I wanted to demonstrate how can we do our error handling. This is all taken care of behind the scenes by the SDK. So if there's anything wrong with your network call, if there's something wrong with your request, there is something wrong with your, there's any server error, everything is handled by the SDK, and you get optimized error that has any error message, the status code, and any information that you might need in case of a failed request. Okay, so yeah, we have this setup now. Okay, so the next step is to get us a tokenized client. I'll return a client. We are passing in a client here, and if I check its methods, there are two methods. I want to use this with configuration. What it does, we'll go over it. Let it takes in partial configuration, and this is, by the way, the same configuration that we just passed in here. So we can pass in any configuration here. Let me see if we have a property for token, and we have Finicity app token. And I can use this method that we just created. And this will give us the access token. There is one more step that we need to do, and that is to use the wait keyword, because this is an async function. And so what this is doing is this client has this method with configuration. It takes in partial configuration. We can, if we have anything that was not part of the initial configuration, we can pass it in, pass it here. And if we want to override any configuration property, we can pass that as well. And this is going to add or override the configuration and make us a new client. So this is not the client that we were using for using here to create this authentication controller. We passed in a client here. So this was our initial client. Now we have created another client, and the client of TypeScript SDK, Finicity's TypeScript SDKs are immutable. So every time you have to change anything with the configuration, you have to create a new client, because this is totally immutable.
So what is the advantage of having immutable clients anyway?
Okay, so we don't want the SDK users to change the state of our client. So if there is anything, for instance, there's access token, we don't want it to change again and again in the same client instance. We want to create a new client if we have to change our configuration. And this is especially useful in cases where we have multi-threading or we have concurrent environments. We don't want multiple threads to change our existing client. So with immutable clients, these come very handy in situations where we have concurrent environments.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so now we have a tokenized client. I think we can create a transaction controller. And why do we need to create it? Let's first see what's the endpoint that we want to call. We want to call get transactions all endpoint. Let me go to Finicity's portal. And here we have an endpoint group called transactions. We can select the get customer transactions all endpoint. This is the endpoint that we want to call. And as you can see, there is again a bunch of code client that is already initialized, so we don't need to repeat that step. And I think at this point we can configure it to show us okay, so first we need our transactions controller initialized as well. So let me copy this and insert in our application. We have this factory method here, which is create transaction controller. I'll just paste this here. I'm going to add import for this transactions controller, and I think I can simply return it. Okay, so I think we can do one more thing in this method, and that is we can use our tokenized client here. So let me make a tokenized client here. And set it to the method we just created. And we'll pass in the client. Okay, so we have a tokenized client. It is a promise because we have not used a wait keyword here, and now this truly is an async function. And let me pass the tokenized client here. Okay, so everything's set up here. I'll just go here and create us a transactions controller instance. I'll call it transactions controller. I think that's the name in our code sample as well. So it will come handy when we are copying and inserting the code. Okay, so function we want to call is get transactions controller. Let me check what was our method's name. Okay, so it's create transactions controller. And I'll just paste it here. Okay, and we'll pass in our initial client here. So a new client will be created, which will be tokenized, and that is going to be eventually used by the transactions controller. So this is again a promise. I'm going to use a wait here. And I think we have our transactions controller set up now. So we can get to the part where we can call our API. So let me copy all this, insert it here, indent it so it looks neat. And now if we look at this, this is everything we need to call this endpoint. So this code at line number 37, this is calling this is calling the endpoint that we wanted to call. Okay, so I'm going to go and remove these try catch. Make sure you don't remove these and you properly handle your errors. But I am going to remove those, and just to make things simple, I'll just use the result here. Okay, so again, this was a destructured object the result is getting us get transaction response, and we are passing this into into a method called insert query, and this is going to get our Snowflake database populated with all this information. Okay, so this is all set up. I just need to change these values here. I have those copied somewhere. Let me find those. And the first one is customer ID. I want this to be my customer ID. The second one is from date. And we have our from date value here, which I think was same. And the third one is to date, and I'll pass in this timestamp as well. So, okay, we have everything set up here. I don't think we need to change start and limit. So let's stick to those. And yeah, I think that is it. So that is pretty much it from the Finicity's part. This was how easy it was using these SDKs. So I think we can switch over to ThoughtSpot.
All right, just to recap what we did in the Finicity app. So we first called the first endpoint to get the access token. And for that access token, you need a partner ID and partner secret. That's something that you get when you sign up on APIMatic. So after that, after getting the access token, we have called the transactions endpoint to get the customer data. And the next bit is where that data gets stored in the Snowflake database. That's already present within this application that you have. So that's already taken care of. The next step that we're going to do now is work with the ThoughtSpot API to actually convert that raw data into the graphs.
Thank you for the recap, Absar. So this is our ThoughtSpot file. I have a bunch of similar comments here as well. We can add our code below these comments. So let's go a similar route here, get our bearer token first, and now let's go to ThoughtSpot's portal. And again, we'll select .NET. Actually, we'll be selecting the TypeScript. We have bunch of endpoints here. The endpoint that we want to call is in this sessions endpoint group, and it's get token. We'll configure it to show us complete file because we don't have our client initialized. Let me copy this and insert it in our application. I'll add in this code here. I'll add the import. So we have some configurations here. We have our content type set to application/JSONs. Let's do this for accept language as well. Increase our timeout. There's this access token. Again, this is some random value. I think we can go ahead and remove this. And given our environment variable for this. And let me copy its name as well. It's ThoughtSpot access token, and we have it here. Okay, so yeah, next step is to get us our bearer token. I'll go to the code samples again, and go a similar route, copy all of this and paste it, insert it in our application. I'm going to remove the try catch here as well. I just want to get us our access token. Okay, also we need to initialize our controller. So let me copy code for this as well. Okay, so let me quickly see if I have the right imports for client I have. For session controller, we can update the imports. We can add in all the missing details here. I'll remove the HTTP response and I'll return this result. And actually, we just want token at this point. So yes, I think we have everything set up here. I'm going to make this an environment variable. And the name I have for this is ThoughtSpot username. And again, I need to pass in a default value since this is required. There is this one more parameter that we can pass here, and that is password. This is optional, but we wanted to get us our access token. I'm going to use my environment variable for this as well. Okay, yes, so we used our session controller, we called the get token method and we passed in this body. This body was of this type TS public REST v2 session get token request. It needed a username and a password. We passed those and we passed this object here. And now we have the complete code to call this endpoint. So, well, when this is, I think now we are all done with our access token code. We can head over and see what endpoint do we want to call. And this is search query data. And I can head over to portal again. We can go to data endpoint group. This is the first endpoint in this group, and first thing first, we want to use this uh, data controller initialization. Okay, so we'll insert this here, update our imports, and we have our client here. Let me see, where should we tokenize our client? Okay, we can tokenize our client here. Let me quickly do that. We'll go a similar route. We are going to call const, we call it tokenized client. So let's make a constant for this. Tokenized client, and we'll use our client. We'll use this method with configuration. Pass in any partial configuration that we have. Actually, let me remove these spaces. I think I'm using those wrong. And do we have anything for token? We have an access token property here, and we can simply call this get bearer token method here. And I'll use the wait keyword since this is an async function. And yeah, this is pretty much it. Let me use this tokenized client here and return us this data controller. Okay, so yes, we have everything set up here. Now we can go ahead and call the endpoint that we want to call. All right, so let's head over to our portal and copy everything that we need. Okay, let me copy this with try and catch, and I'll just simplify this along the way. We have again some imports missing here. Let's first add those imports. And we need to initialize we need to create a constant for this data controller. Let me do that here. And we'll just call the factory method that we created for getting us the data controller. So we'll call this, pass in the existing client. The method will create a new client, which will be tokenized, and that will be used by our data controller. So yeah, I think we have everything set up here. I'll remove this and remove this and indent this. Remove any extra spaces. Remove the complete HTTP response. And yeah, I think we are using our result right now. So this returns us an some response from search query data, and we are then using it to populate our graph. So it is one last step that we need to do, and that is to give us to pass a query string and data object ID. This is the body that is going in the search query data. So let me find the values that I want to use here. Okay, so for data object ID, I am going to use this ID. And for the query string, I'll make this a templated string, and I'll remove everything in it. I'll create two arrays because this is the format that we want our query string in. I'll provide two placeholders here, and I want to pass in measure and attribute. So we have defined this endpoint here, and someone is going to call it and provide us these two query parameters. We will simply pass those in our query string. So let me do that. The first one is measure. So no, the first one I want to use is attribute actually. I'll place attribute here, and I'll place measure here. And yeah, we have everything set up. So let me see if there's anything missing. No, seems like we are done. So okay, so we are in our server application. One last step that we want to do is we want to build this. This will build us this application, and it will be in a folder called dist, and from there we'll start our server. So we have our client application here. And we are going to start this in the background. And okay, so we have our server built up. Let me start it. So while this starts, I think I can quickly check my React app. This is starting the development server and our Node.js server is running. Okay, so yeah, we have everything set up. Let's just wait for the client application to start.
All right, so I'm just going to repeat this once again that if you missed a few steps, don't worry about it. We will share a recording of this session on our website, so you can go ahead and complete your code afterwards as well. And you can even do it in in a different language because the API calls, the code samples are actually available on these portals. So if you're making a Python application, you're more than welcome to actually do that. You can get the SDKs as well from the portals and then use the sample code that we have in your applications.
Okay, thank you, Absar. We have our React app running here, and we have our server running as well. So yeah, let me find the ID that I want to submit. Okay, so ID that I want to pass in here is this ID. We are getting an error, and this is a timeout issue. Let me increase the timeout. I think I have given an where is our client initialized? Okay, so 1000 milliseconds. I didn't realize this is too short. Let me give in 10,000. So we have enough time to get our response. We'll again build this. We'll start our application. I'm going to copy this and let's wait for our application to start. And yes, our server is running. We can now pass in this and we can see some logs here. And yes, we have this matrix here. So I think we can select any metric. So let me try to search amount against category. So amount by category on analyzing gives us, it should give us some sort of graph. Okay, we have one error here, and this is e-connection refused. I think I know why this error we are seeing. If we go to ThoughtSpot, so there are different URLs. We want to hit the v2 version of it, and that might not be configured by default here. So let me find the exact URL that we want to paste here. Okay, so this is my 2.thotspot.cloud. I'll give it here. Okay, so I hope it works this time. So I'm building this again, and I'll run this again. I should have configured my scripts to run and build simultaneously. I'm just realizing this now. And we can now start this. Let me, I want to go through all the steps from the start. We are now, this is behind the scene calling Finicity's API. And then this is going to populate our Snowflake database. So this all happened in this step. Now we have few matrices. So I'll select amount against category and analyze it. And now this should give us some graph. We made our timeout short here as well. So let me build this.
These are the wonders of live coding anyway, so you can face any issues that you wouldn't see, you wouldn't even see them coming. So it's fine, no worries.
Okay, so we are going to start a server, and let's hope this is our final try. Is our server running? It is, and fingers crossed. So Finicity's API is called. Our Snowflake database is populated. Now we have again these matrices. I'll select unit quantity. I'll select category because this is the one I've tried, and I'm hoping this will give us a neat looking graph. There are some logs here, and we don't have any errors here, so I think our network call is taking a little longer. Let me try something else like fee amount by category. So we have attribute against measure. I don't see anything missing here. So this is why you should not skip your try and catches that I just did. So let's quickly guard those by our try and catches and see if we have. First, we are going to see if we are getting any access token. Dot token dot length. Yeah, we want to check if the access token is empty or not. This is the bad way of debugging. The good way is try and catch, but we are going live and I just want to get done with this. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to try, I'll actually guard this with a try and catch. And in our catch, we will just log in the error. Okay, so no, this is not what we want. I think we have one bracket here that we don't need. And I'm going to console log our error. Okay, so this takes in a non-property. Let me just initialize one here. Const result, and let me make it a non, and I'll assign this result to our result, and I'll just pass. Okay, so this is const. I want it to be not a constant, and yeah, I think I can pass it here. And let's build our app, and this time we have some sort of error handling here. I'll build this. I'll start the server, and I'll give in the ID. And upon submission, let's see if we get any logs for this. Connection to Snowflake done. Let's just go with this for now. So we did get an access token. Okay, so now we have our graphs working, and we did nothing but just our error handling, changed not a bit of our code, and it's working. So let's just change our matrices and see what magic can we do with this. So amount against status is giving us a different kind of graph. So these are the basic graphs. Let's try something like amount by category. I'm hoping this gives a more neat graph. Yeah, this is one of those graphs. So let me change this to p amount and analyze this. And we have another kind of graph now, another different looking graph. So I'll just change this to unit amount. And this is giving us a different representation of the graph. So yeah, we can play around with these matrices. We can check against status. We can check against security ID maybe, and a whole bunch of other matrices. So category one was, it's the one I found most interesting. So yeah, this is about it.
All right, so yeah, we finally got our graph that we were looking for. Okay, so thank you so much, Wajahat, for the amazing workshop. That was really interesting. If any of you missed any steps, don't worry about it. We will share a recording of this on our website that you can use. So I hope that all of our viewers found it extremely helpful and learned how easy it is to integrate APIs into your project using SDKs. So let's switch over to the Q&A section now. So Wajahat, if you could just give me a moment, I'd like to share my screen real quick. Just give me a moment, please. All right, so the first question that I have is, we used SDKs to integrate the APIs in our application, right? So where did these SDKs come from? I see that Finicity and ThoughtSpot had SDKs in about 4 to 5 different languages. Now, so did they create those themselves?
Okay, so with SDKs for so the SDKs for both the APIs and their documentation portals were generated using APIMatic. With APIMatic, you can generate SDKs in 6 languages. TypeScript is the one that we just used. Other than that, Java, Python, .NET, Ruby, and PHP are the other languages. And we have 2 more languages coming in. One is Go and the other one is Swift. So these are currently in our alpha release. And it's not just about creating the SDKs. There is a maintenance cost as well. So if you're looking for well-designed SDKs and neat-looking portals for your APIs, check out APIMatic.
All right. So another question. In our application, we integrated multiple APIs through SDKs, right? So how does the integration time and overall application change if, let's say, we were to use the APIs directly instead of using them through SDKs? What are the advantages of using SDKs, and how does it impact API consumption and overall developer experience?
Okay, so with the manual consumption, you get to deal with things like routes, HTTP methods, JSON handling, form, query, security schemes, multi-part data, and all such sort of stuff. So this is all RESTful language. The integration for this will take a lot more time. SDKs, on the other hand, for your API, SDK is an abstraction layer, and it cuts down the integration time by a good margin. So now with SDKs like we used in our application, we only integrated the product that we wanted to use. We didn't have to worry about any of the RESTful stuff like routes and JSON, etc. That was all taken care of behind the scenes, and it was just as easy to use Finicity's and ThoughtSpot's API. Plus, SDKs enhance developer experience a lot. If SDKs have things like retries and optimized error handling, developers are going to love your API.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. So we have another question, and that is that, can these TypeScript SDKs be used in web browser as well?
Okay, so we use these SDKs in Node.js, but these can be used in browser environment as well. These SDKs are isomorphic, meaning they can be used independently. These are platform independent and can be used in both kinds of environments.
All right, so we've got a follow-up question that is pretty similar here. So that is, can TypeScript SDKs be used with JavaScript applications as well?
Okay, so when we build the SDK like we did with the Finicity's SDK, the TypeScript compiles down to JavaScript. There are some type files as well, but since it compiles to JavaScript, it can be used with the JavaScript application. So yes, we can use the SDKs in JavaScript applications. The types that I mentioned, there are some type files as well. These are for the people who are writing their application in TypeScript like we did. So it helps them with strict typing and type hinting in their IDE.
All right, great. So thank you for that, Wajahat. So that's all the time we had for this workshop. For the remaining questions, we'll make sure that our team answers those via email. Special thanks to Wajahat for the wonderful demonstration. I hope all our viewers enjoyed the session and learned how easy it is to integrate APIs using SDKs. So we have a lot more workshops planned for the future as well, and we would love to hear your feedback on this. In the future, if you would like us to do workshops for any specific language, let us know and we'll be happy to do those. And If there are any popular APIs that you would like us to showcase in our workshop, share those with us and we'll plan something around it. A recording of this session will be made available on our website, so you can revisit this workshop whenever you like. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a great day and see you next time.